But let's first say hello to a brave new world we are all living in. Why? Because we are, at this moment, I think, witnesses of a true gravitational shift. A gravitational shift on 3 different levels. Economic power, the lifestyle of the world's population, and the age structure of the global population. First of all, we see that people are moving massively from the countryside towards cities, and they are looking there for work and for wealth. We also see that the world has never been younger than today. 1 out of 3 is younger than 30 years old. And in emerging markets, it's even more than half of the population who is Generation Y. If you combine those 2 trends, let's say, what do you get? Well, a young, urban, emerging middle class in a lot of different countries around the world. And it's that young, emerging middle class that is the true engine behind the shift in economic power that we see. The shift in economic power from developed countries to developing countries to new markets. And we see that a lot of global brands, a lot of multinational companies really see a lot of opportunities in those new, rising, fast-growing economies to, let's say, almost counterbalance the status quo they are experiencing in the West. And the question is then, well, how are brands going to grasp all those new opportunities that are lying out there? Well, we are living in a connected world, and it seems like the web is an ideal tool for brands, and especially for global brands, to strengthen their global appeal on the one side and to create global scale. Because the web allows us to have knowledge at our fingertips. The web allows people to communicate with one another. And for brands, communicating with the whole world is almost just a couple of clicks away. And brands do that. We see brands building what we can call global brand tribes. And consumers do it. Consumers like it. Consumers want to be connected with brands. If we look at the online population worldwide, we see that more than half of the online population is connected to brands in one way or another. Take the example of Heineken, for example. They have 12 million brand fans, and it's a truly international bunch of people. So it seems like global brands are really in pole position to grasp all the new opportunities that are lying in emerging markets. Because probably they, through online, through social media, can build global appeal and global scale at a very rapid pace. But probably this story is a little bit too easy. Because we see a lot of global brands, a lot of multinational companies doing this, and they fail. They fail big time when entering those new economies. Why? Because they think it's as easy as I just described. They forget to adapt. They forget to localize. And I think a very nice example of this is McDonald's. They are doing quite well right now in terms of adapting their strategy to local cultures and local markets, but they really learned the hard way. In India, for example, they entered the market a couple of years ago with their Western product offering, and it was a disaster. So they adapted step by step. The first thing they did was, of course, offering a vegetarian option, because half of the population is vegetarian. Second thing they did was making their food slightly spicier. That's easy. But it didn't stop there. They needed to do more in order to be really successful. They also redesigned their restaurants. Indian people want to see how things are cooked, how things are prepared. So closed kitchens all of a sudden became open kitchens. They also repositioned their brand towards becoming a family restaurant, a place where you can have great times with your family. And the final thing they did was lowering the entry price point. They started to offer budget menus. And that was what made that a lot of people tried their products and came in for the first time. I think it's a great example that shows that if you want to be successful as a global brand, you need to localize. And it's not only about localizing your product offering, it's about rethinking your whole marketing mix. It's about rethinking your whole marketing strategy. We also asked this question, global, local, what should you do? How should you combine it? To 21 senior executives of global brands. And they all agreed with us that indeed it's about building global appeal, creating global scale, but localizing everything you do. Your products, your brand and product activation is key. Otherwise, you will fail. But I think there is even more. It's not only about localizing your marketing mix in order to be successful and to grasp the opportunities in those new markets. That's very opportunistic, I think. You can also learn a lot from what's going on in those new markets. You can gain new best practices, and you can learn a lot about how business is done in a world that is very rapidly evolving. And I will give 3 examples. I will show you 3 trends that show you that it's not only about grasping the opportunities over there, it's also about gaining new learnings. The first one is leapfrogging. And a great example is mobile. What do we see? That in a lot of those new markets, people skip the PC phase when it comes to internet. They immediately go to mobile internet. Especially in Brazil. Brazil has the highest penetration of mobile phones, smartphones, and of social media adoption. What do we see? That Brazilian marketeers know a lot more about social media marketing and mobile marketing than we do in the West. So that's why it would be wise as a company to put Brazilians who have experimented a lot, who have failed a lot, who know the best practices, to put them as a global brand in the global driver's seat when it comes to mobile marketing and social media marketing. The second example is reverse innovation. That's all about inventing something for a new market, but afterwards applying the same tactics when they become relevant in developed economies as well. An example here, an illustration here, is what Procter & Gamble and Unilever do right now in Southern Europe. In Greece, Portugal, Spain, all those markets that are suffering from the crisis. Well, for their laundry brands, they apply exactly the same tactics that they are applying in countries like India. In order to make their high-quality brand affordable for the suffering lower middle class, they create smaller packs with powder only for 1 week of doing laundry. So it's not only about learning about new best practices, it's also about applying tactics and transposing them from one region or one country to another. And the final one is one of the domain of innovation. In Asia, especially Southeast Asia, they don't spend months or even years in labs to create a perfect product. No, they have a good enough product and throw it on the market and make it better in iterative loops based on the feedback of the first customers, of the first consumers. We call this innovation through commercialization. Again, something I think we can all learn of when it comes to innovation, which goes absolutely too slow in the West. So I think new economies, that's where the future lies, partly, and there is a lot to gain there in terms of dollars, euros, but there is also a lot to learn there. But in order to grasp all those opportunities, I think we need to be brave in this new world, because it will not be easy. I think this could be partly the success formula for global brands today. Yes, global appeal and global scale, that's still important, but it's very important to gain local relevance and especially to build up local learnings. The last two are the most important, and the last one is probably the missed opportunity today. That's why I think we need to change the name. Don't talk anymore about global brands, talk about universal brands. Because a universal brand will bring those four elements together. A universal brand is a brand that is built around a universal insight. That's an insight or a cluster of insights that all people around the world appeal to. It evokes the same kind of, aha, it's me feeling around the world. So you have that universal insight, and then, as a brand, you create some kind of universe around it that is broad enough that it allows for local adaptations, while still staying true to what the brand stands for on the global level. And finally, as a universal brand, you build your organization in a way that you can constantly gain learnings and exchange learnings between countries and between the local and the global level. A company that understands this very well, or a brand that understands this very well, is Johnny Walker. Their universal insight is, our product is about ambition. And they have their tagline, keep on walking. It's almost the same all around the world, because that's what the brand really stands for. But they slightly adapt it. If you look at the tagline in Brazil, it's keep on walking Brazil. Why? Well, they play in their advertising, in their brand activation, on the fact that Brazil is the new economic power, is the rising giant. And they play on the kind of proud of the Brazilians. So they take the same universal insight, but they adapt it to the kind of local culture and market situation. And in that campaign, of course, it's in Brazil, they use a lot of mobile marketing and social media marketing. And all the best practices that they have gained in that specific campaign were taught to all the different local countries on how to use social media marketing, mobile marketing in a better way. So that's becoming a universal brand instead of a global brand. You understand the global level, you understand the local level, and you constantly work together between countries and between the local and the global level. So the real question is, how are we going to gain that local relevance? Because that seems to be important. How are we going to get to the local learnings? How are we going to get under the skin of different cultures, new markets? And Nelson Mandela said it very well. And he shows why this is so important. If you speak a language a man understands, you speak to his mind. If you speak his language, you speak to his heart. And that's what a lot of brands don't do well today. They want to enter those new markets, but they don't know the language. So they need to speak the language of the people over there. They need to understand how those people live. How can we do that? How can research help to understand local cultures, new markets? Well, I think there are 4 ingredients we need in the methodology that can do that. The first thing is, we will not understand those new markets by looking at figures alone. We will need a lot of observation, and we will need a lot of dialogue with the people over there. It's a little bit like dating. It involves first a lot of observation, then a lot of talking and drinks and restaurant visits, before you really get to know one another. So a lot of dialogue will be needed. So we will need a qualitative research methodology. Secondly, most of those countries are huge and are very diverse in terms of cultures within the country, in terms of social classes, in terms of ethnicity. So we will need a methodology that allows us to talk to a broad group of people, because only then we will understand that country to the fullest extent. I always say I travel quite a lot, but I probably only know how taxi drivers live in all countries around the world. So we will need a methodology that allows us to have a dialogue with a lot of different people. And finally, I think we will need time. We will need time to get to know those people. So we will need a longitudinal research methodology. It's a little bit like the difference of being on a city trip in Berlin and living for a year in Berlin. It's a totally different understanding of the dynamics in this city. And it would also be great, of course, if we have a methodology that allows us to be agile, to react quickly on what happens in the world, to be able to connect almost in a 24/7 mode with consumers. Because if you look at how business is done, for example, in Southeast Asia, it goes at a speed which is far more rapid than what we know here. If we bring all those ingredients together, what do we need? A consumer, customer consulting board, or a market research online community, if you want. Because that methodology, that qualitative research methodology, allows us to connect with a large group of people, a diverse group of people, over a longer period of time in a very convenient way, because it's on an online closed platform. So I really think communities are a great way to understand new cultures and new markets. And I think it touches upon the discussion we had right before the break. It's a great methodology to get under the skin of a market. But of course, now the question rises. Tom, if you say brands need to adapt, need to gain local relevance, do we as market researchers, if we apply a methodology in different countries, do we need to adapt our methodology as well? The answer is yes. We need to do or run communities differently in different countries. The basic principles are the same, but the way you connect with the people is different. Only then, just like in the case of McDonald's, you will be really successful if you want to do research for McDonald's in India, if you also adapt your methodology. On which axis do you need to adapt? First of all, language. I know that there are companies who do communities in China in English. Doesn't work. We tried that. We did that. Doesn't work. People participate less often, less intensively, and even if they are fluent in English, the nuance will be far less than if they would talk in their mother tongue. So the first rule is always do a community in the language of the people in the country. But that's not enough. If you look at the American anthropologist Edward Hall, in his iceberg theory, cultural iceberg model, he says language is only 10% of culture. There is far more than that. So it's not only about talking with the people in their language, it's also having a moderator that is a native, that understands the culture and the local market situation. Only then you can have a real great qualitative discussion. That's why we have created a global community moderator network in more than 30 countries to be able to run communities all around the world. And what's the beauty of having a network of moderators all around the world? Well, you can connect with them, co-create with them best practices on how to run communities in the best possible way in each of those countries. How to adapt your methodology so that it's successful in each of those countries. And that's exactly what we did. And I will now give like 5 axes, 5 dimensions on which we change our topic guides, our way of working to the local market situation. And each of those dimensions and the directions in which you need to adapt your community can be explained by the great work of the Dutch researcher Hofstede. So nothing new under the sun here. It's just applying his theories to gaining best practices in running communities all around the world. The first thing that you need to change is the way you motivate and incentivize people. Some countries are very extrinsically driven, others are more intrinsically driven. If I look, for example, at the US and a country like Poland, very intrinsically and extrinsically motivated, but each for different reasons. In the US, they expect to be paid because that's how it goes there. If you do something, you get money for it. It's almost like that. In Eastern European countries, it's like a welcome extra. While on the other hand, if we look at a country like Brazil or even India, they are far more intrinsically motivated. The Brazilians want to be connected and have a dialogue with those very aspirational brands. Indians feel like, I want to share my knowledge with the people behind those big brands. So it's a big difference between extrinsic motivation, intrinsic motivation, and you really need to understand this in order to get them in. There is even more. For example, in Eastern European countries, there is a big trust issue. Even if you tell people that you will pay them like the equivalent of 50 euros, they don't believe you. So you need to, from the start, gain the trust, because if they don't believe that you will pay the incentive, they will even not start in the research. And the final element is that you need to adapt your incentive to the country. Don't think that PayPal fits all. Different incentive in different countries. So that's the first one. Intrinsic, extrinsic motivation, the trust issue, and what it actually is also needs to be adapted. Second thing is data collection method. We just talked about Brazil and how mobile is the normal way of connecting with the web. This means that in a lot of countries, like in Latin America, like in Southeast Asia, if you are there with your community on your desktop or on your laptop, you will not get a lot of participation. What we need is mobile communities or even mobile-only communities. What does this do with your topic guide? Well, you need to not tweak it, totally rethink it. If you take questions that you would normally ask on desktop or laptop, and you go to mobile, it's making questions shorter, it's having more questions, but smaller questions, and it's about doing more task-based research than having real discussions. This asks for a total rethink of what you do. Talking about the topic guides, you also need to be careful with how you ask different things and what you expect from the consumers in your community. Some countries like to talk and share a lot about themselves. Others feel safer with talking about the group and the group dynamics. Some countries like it if you give them power, if you empower them, if you ask them to co-create with you. Other countries feel very safe or safer when they just have to give feedback on what already exists. Country on this axis, for example, is China. It's very difficult to do real online ethnographic research in China. People don't want to share quite a lot, especially not from the beginning, with somebody they don't know, how they really live. So first you need to connect with one another, but secondly, you always need to be careful. Don't ask too much about themselves, rather use the projective technique about talking about the group and about other people. In countries like Russia, co-creation is rather difficult. It works better with each time already showing them something and then moving towards a final end product instead of just saying like, this is this problem, let's start creating ideas. While on the other hand, Brazilians love it. They really love to co-create with one another. Fourth axis on which we need to adapt is the role of the moderator. That's also different. In China, Russia, Eastern Europe, a moderator needs to be rather directive. You need to tell them what to do now. While in Brazil, they expect that the moderator is like a facilitator that starts the discussion and that kicks in at important moments to guide the discussion in a different direction. So it's a difference between being very much in control as a moderator and being more like the facilitator that sees if everything goes well. Also, how you talk to the people and the way you deal with them is different. In China, people expect that you are really very objective and professional, that you show that you are a well-trained market researcher. While in a country like India, for example, they like it if you are more of a peer and if you come a little bit down of your ivory tower. Final element is gamification. We are quite a fan at Insites Consulting of gamifying our market research online communities, but you need to be very careful. Because some countries love gamification, others think like, well, what is this all leading to? Within Europe, for example, we see that in Spain, People really love gamification, and our moderator needs to add elements of gamification to it. Even things like having riddles that are hidden in different topics, and then they need to create some kind of puzzle altogether, which has nothing to do with the research. While on the other hand, in Germany, if you introduce something like that, they'll say like, well, that's not why we're here. So they love gamification to the extent that it brings added value to the task you give them. It's not just playing, it's serious gaming, almost. So that are the 5 dimensions on which, let's say, if you have a global topic guide in an international piece of research, you need to slightly adapt, tweak it. You need to think about how you're going to collect the data. You need to think about how you're going to incentivize the people. You need to think about how you're going to ask the question, how you see your role as a moderator, and how much gamification you add to it. But it's not only about changing the way you collect the information, it's also about changing the way, or rethinking a little bit the way you analyze the information. We recently did a big study for Red Bull in 18 different countries, so 18 communities in parallel. One of the questions was, of course, about what does energy mean in all those different countries. Well, if we would just look at all those 18 countries and just look at what they say, we could state that, well, all around the world, energy means quite the same thing. It's only if you start looking at how they say things that you see differences. The way they express themselves, the metaphors they are using, the symbols they are using, and what they mean within their culture, that's where the real gold lies. That's where you really see where the difference is between Latin American countries, Asian countries, North America, and Europe. One of the things that we saw, for example, is Americans tend to talk about energy, and especially about an energy drink, as if it's fuel for their body, and they describe their body as something very mechanic, as almost a machine. While if you look at Eastern Europe, they talk about forces of nature. And of course, it's not only getting to those metaphors, getting to those symbols. Again, it's important to see what they mean in the culture. And that's again why it's so important to have a local moderator who is totally into the culture and into the local market. But even if you have a local moderator, he or she will not understand everything in that community. That's one of the things we do as market researchers. If you are a good trained, well-trained market researcher, you can really work for all kinds of different product categories and talk with all kinds of different profiles of people. And by the fact that we are well-trained, we understand quite a lot about their lives. We know how to ask questions to them. We know how to try to understand them. But even if we are well-trained, we cannot understand everything because we are not living all those different lives. I did a big research project for MTV in different countries around the world with young kids in big cities. And I had the feeling like I'm still young. I always say I'm in between Generation Y and Generation X. But maybe that means that I'm Generation Y just because I'm saying that. But I think I cannot fully understand how it is to be a 16-year-old girl living in New York City, although I can be a very well-trained qualitative researcher. That's why we involve participants in moderation, analysis, and reporting to fill our blind spots. We still do the moderation, we still do the analysis, we still do the reporting, and we know that some things we don't understand to the fullest extent, so we bring in participants to help us with that. In moderation, for example, we have a co-pilot next to the moderator who asks additional questions, additional probing questions. What do you see? The co-pilot asks different questions than the moderator because he or she is part of the target group. We see also when we do analysis that sometimes we have pieces of data we don't understand. What do? We curate them, we put them aside, and afterwards we invite 10 people of the community that volunteered for the task to help us with analyzing those pieces of data together with us, which gives us a richer understanding of those pieces of data that from the beginning we didn't understand to the fullest extent. And finally, in terms of reporting, what we do is at the end of a piece of research, we dry run our main conclusions in front of the community. And they can shoot on it, can tell us where we are wrong. This works in every single country, but it's especially great in cultures you don't understand, even if you have a local moderator. For example, we did a project in China where it was about sleeping problems, which is a medical issue, and it was about new solutions Philips was inventing to overcome sleeping problems. And by the fact that you are talking about a medical subject in China, you know it will be difficult. Because sensitive topic, culture in which socially desirable answering is the norm. What did we do in order to overcome that? Well, we did the dry running of our main conclusions in front of the people. And they were freed from their socially desirable answering because all of a sudden they got a new role. They weren't anymore the participants, but they were helping us to go after the truth. It's some kind of projective technique we used. And finally, I think communities are also a great way to have people as your local eyes and ears into those local markets. We have a lot of clients who say, well, communities, that's online. You need people with smartphones. In India, less than 10% has a smartphone. Is this representative? No, it isn't. It's qualitative research on the one hand. But secondly, you can work with the people who are already online and use them as your eyes and ears in the market. They can help you also to understand the other target groups. So wrap up of the presentation, what have we seen? We have seen that there is a lot of opportunity lying out there in new markets. And brands, big brands, global brands can grasp the opportunities over there if they localize. But it's not only about going for the dollars, going for the euros. You also need to learn. There's a lot to learn in those new markets. How are we going to get to those learnings and to those opportunities? Well, by really understanding people. And if you want to understand people, a community can be a great way to get under their skin because it's a longitudinal research methodology. It can be a great way to constantly adapt yourself in a world, and especially in those countries that is moving very fast. And finally, we have also seen that if you want to do it right, you need to walk your own talk. You need to adapt your methodology on a couple of different axes, and you need to analyze in a different way. You even need to involve participants as co-researchers to do the best possible job. Final question now is, we have, or we can have, all those local insights, like in the project that we did for Red Bull, 18 different countries. But how are you going to have the helicopter view? And what's then the role of the local teams and the global teams? The global research teams, the local research teams, the global marketing teams, the local marketing teams. Well, here, the branding guru, Aker, I think gives us great advice. Companies don't need global brands, they need global brand leadership. And that fits perfectly well with the vision of becoming not a global brand, but a universal brand. Because the global team will be responsible for creating the universal insight, for creating the brand universe, for making the local teams enthusiastic about that universal insight so that they believe that that's the way to go. And the local teams need to adapt their product offering, their brand and product activation to the local culture and the local market situation, while still staying true, of course, to the universal insight. And the only way you can do that is by constantly working together on a global and on a local level. Because the final thing that is important as being a global brand leader is that you make sure that best practices from local level sometimes are promoted towards the global level, like in the example of mobile and social marketing in Brazil, and that you make sure that countries that have similar dynamics in their markets talk with one another so they can transform tactics from one country or region to another one. An example of that is what we have done with Ruffles, a PepsiCo chips brand in Turkey, where we went to Turkey to make the local people there, local team, very enthusiastic about the universal insight that is behind the Ruffle brands. But we also did a community locally in Turkey, one of those new markets, to understand how we needed to adapt the product offering, the brand activation, and the product activation to the local culture. So it's really about constantly working together on the global and on the local level. So I would say don't go global, don't go local, but go universal. And especially, and I know it's not lunchtime yet, but especially stay hungry for new opportunities, because the world is full of new opportunities today, and stay hungry to learn from what's happening in all those new markets, because it's really exciting what's happening over there. Thank you.